Hello! So we've been talking about the Industrial Revolution the last several days, and I want to finish off that discussion about what it is that makes America become an industrialized society after the Civil War by taking a look just a little bit more at this issue of what makes our businesses run. You know, we talked about all kinds of things the last several days, whether it was the rise of big business or railroads or inventions and raw materials and laissez-faire. And today, spend a little bit more time talking about the need for unions. Because what you're seeing here with the need for unions is going to be a greater discussion about the workforce. Now that's going back to lesson 1 where we said you need a large workforce in all of these factories and all of these big businesses that are growing up thanks to horizontal integration and selling stocks and vertical integration. So when you have all of these new workers, you're going to have to talk and think more about what their lives are like. What is it that they're going through? So when we discuss workers in this second industrial revolution, this gilded age, what we need to think of is their living conditions in general. Here are 4 things to see. Number 1, prices are going to fall. They're going to drop because we saw all of those factory workers producing so many goods that the prices can fall. And we called that, if you remember, an economy of scale. And we said when you do that, you can produce more for less cost and charge less and sell more. But that means that prices will fall. And we go back to that chart, right? You can make more, costs less, so you can lower the price. If you could buy more for less, a company's not going to want to pay you the same. They're going to want to cut your wages. Think about it like this. If, I don't know, Kraft mac and cheese, right? If Kraft mac and cheese costs me $1 right now, but lots of things happen, right? I don't know, maybe Kraft sells a lot of stock, it invests, it invents new technology, gets a really big workforce. Maybe they practice some horizontal integration and buy up all of the other mac and cheese companies out there, and so the whole world is filled with Kraft mac and cheese. Then the price might actually fall. Maybe the price for that mac and cheese now is just going to be 50 cents. Well, my pay hasn't changed. The price of goods have changed. Instead of being able to buy 1 box of mac and cheese, now I can buy 2. But there's no need for me to pay you so much money as a factory worker, right? Or to earn so much money as a factory worker. If I cut wages from $1 down to 50 cents, well then, now all of a sudden, you can still buy just 1 box of mac and cheese like you used to be able to do. Look, this makes people angry. Of course it should make people angry because they were making money and they were working really hard, and just when they're thinking they're getting ahead because the prices of goods are dropping, their companies come along and slash their wages. Well, that's going to make people unhappy. So what you're going to see here is workers pushing for a new kind of organization, and that's what you need to know. A union is an organization, and their goal is to help workers. And they're going to see them tackle and go after a whole bunch of different kinds of things. Whether that's the fact that so many people in companies were suffering with unhealthy living conditions and unhealthy working conditions. Like, hello, look at these kids. Their feet are freaking like barefoot. Whether it's dull and repetitive work, that doing the same work for 8 hours a day, or the fact that there are no safety precautions in place at all for these people working in these factories, we're going to see people turn to unions as a solution. They're going to say, we need a way out of this. What's the solution to make us earn more money so that we're able to get better pay? What's that solution going to be? So, let's investigate. The solution is going to be unions. And unions are an organization of workers in an industry. And these workers in an industry, these unions, they join together and they negotiate with business. And their whole goal is to try and make sure that businesses treat them better as workers. So whether that's giving us better pay or all those things we mentioned on the last slide, workers are going to fight for these things. And let's be honest, folks, all those things you saw on the last slide, those things like better pay, better working conditions, and so on, that all costs money, man. And the more money you put into your workers, the less money there is in profit. So you're going to end up with workers almost in their unions going against businesses. So I know I use the word negotiate here, which is kind of like when you work together to figure out a solution. What we're really talking about here isn't just necessarily negotiating. What we're really talking about here is conflict. And how do we deal with that conflict between workers that want all of these good things and employers who don't want to spend the money to give it to them? One of the few weapons that workers will have, and that we will talk about time and again, is the strike. And I want to introduce it here, and we'll come back to it at a later date. But just know that one of the things workers can do is just simply stop working. And it's what I see students do all the time. I've seen students who are like, I don't want to be in this class, man. I need to get out of here. I don't want to do what he's saying. And so those students, when we say little things like, okay, now do this or do that, or put away your pencil, or get out your Chromebook, or whatever, the student just doesn't do it. And then we go over and we say, hello there, student. I notice you're not doing this. Is everything okay? And the kid's just like, I'm not going to do it. 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 Well, that's a strike. That kid has stopped their production in an attempt to manipulate me into doing something, maybe to throwing him out of the class or throwing her into ISS. I don't know. I don't know what the kid's actually manipulating me for, but it's definitely an attempt at manipulating. So I can respond, right? Maybe I use a lockout. I can say, you know what? You don't want to do the work? Well, then you don't get the credit. I'm not going to pay you. I'm not going to reward you with the credit. I'm going to have someone come in here, in this class and wants to be here. I'm going to hire a replacement. Essentially, what you have here are workers that want a whole bunch of demands, like you saw on the last slide, and workers who don't, who feel like they deserve it, but business owners who don't feel that workers have the right to demand these things, that workers don't have the authority to demand these things. So let me give you an example of a couple of really big strikes, and we'll talk more in detail about them tomorrow. But here are three really big strikes that you'll see take place in the late 1800s, early 1900s, during the Second Industrial Revolution. And the first, the Great Railroad Strike, is a great example. And so here on the right-hand side, we see railroad workers and their families. See the innocent woman here, someone who might be a little bit younger. And these workers are protesting for better pay, better working conditions, all these things we've talked about. And the owners of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the B&O, did not want to give in to those demands. They actually got the police and the National Guard called out to open fire on these strikers, trying to get them to break up and go back to work. And it was remarkably deadly, these riots. And they spread all across the country as workers were attempting to fight for themselves to have a better working and living condition. 100 dead, 10 million in damages, troops being used to restore order in 3 different states. So a very serious string of strikes in the Great Railroad Strike, which became really the first nationwide protest, where you see these state protests all over the place. And there's 2 others that are listed for you: Haymarket Riot and the Pullman Strike. We'll talk more about those in detail as we go through the lesson. I think the only thing to add here that you really need to know, obviously the workers are upset about different things, whether it's a fight over the number of hours in a workday, or whether it's over cutting wages and something along those lines. But I think when it comes to the Pullman Strike, there is something worth knowing that'll help us in class tomorrow. That'll And this will help us in class tomorrow, because what we're looking at here is the factory of the Pullman Railroad Car Works, and you can see that listed here. Pullman Car Company Works. This is the actual factory component of it, where they would make the railroad cars. But the man Pullman, he actually built this entire town. It's now a part of Chicago, but he built the entire town in order to control his workers. So he put in a lumber yard for the factory, and an athletic set of athletic fields, and a market house where you could go shopping, and a hotel for visitors, and a public square, and a theater, and all kinds of things were put in to the Pullman town to make it attractive to workers to want to work here in this factory. And what's important to note here is what's going to be inside this market house, this central area where workers were. And what you need to know is that prices were raised. Prices were raised on Pullman workers, even as Pullman and other workers saw their wages cut, making life even more difficult. I think by mentioning one last kind of development or growth in these issue of unions as we introduce these groups of people working together, and that's going to be women's unions. And I just didn't want you to think that we were leaving women out in the cold. That's not the case at all. But remember that society really had a different view of women at the time, that women were not considered to be equal to men at all, even close to it. They couldn't vote for another 20 years, for Pete's sakes. So what you see here are women who are sick and tired of being told that they have to participate in women's work and just be teachers or nurses. They're tired of being told they shouldn't strike and just take what you get, paid less than the average man because it was assumed you had one at home if you were actually working. And we know now that's not the case. And we know too that these women were so devoted to their cause that they came out and they worked because they did not have a man to support them. So that was almost like the justification that because you should have a man supporting you, you get paid less than men. But we know that's not true. We know that many of these women didn't have men supporting them. It was an unfair assumption. And even if it was a fair assumption, they should still be paid the same anyway. But the point I want to make here is that women join together and they create their own unions. Women Trade Union League, International Ladies Garment Workers Union. These are for women, by women. They're women in charge of these associations, these unions, and they will continue to push for women's rights in the workplace for decades. So there's a good brief introduction into unions, and we'll take this into much deeper detail during a class tomorrow.